Merci donc à Lydia Maria. Thank you very much because she went from Berlin. Et donc Lydia Maria va présenter sa communication en anglais. Et donc bien, éventuellement on essaiera de traduire s'il y a des soucis pour certains d'entre vous. Voilà. Merci.
Merci pour l'introduction. Je suis très heureux d'avoir la possibilité de présenter ma recherche et je voudrais demander pardon que j'ai préparé une présentation anglaise. Mon français est plus passif que actif. I hope everyone can understand. I'm going to try to talk very clearly and slowly, and please ask any questions you might have. Well, the findings I'm going to present here are part of my doctoral dissertation research, and what I'm interested in this research is in what ways economic considerations influence how care work is provided and how care work is conceptualized. And to explore this, I have conducted ethnographic research with a care provider in Berlin. And my main argument in this presentation will be that marketization is not a straightforward, easy process, but it's entangled with care considerations. And I'll go into that in more detail now. So I will briefly give you an overview of my talk. I will first introduce you to social care in Germany because I thought this might be of interest to you to understand how the system works in your neighbor country. And then I will briefly say a little bit about the theory and methods I'm working with. And then I want to discuss one example that I think is very interesting because it shows a lot of aspects of what of the results I came to. And then I will have a short conclusion. Social care for elderly people in Germany was reformed in the mid-90s. I think this was the time where in many European countries changes were made to the system of providing care for elderly people. And the main change that we had in Germany was the introduction of a compulsory long-term care insurance. So now everybody has this insurance, everybody has to pay about 3% of their monthly income to this insurance, and this is used to support as well private care as and also professional care. One idea that came with this insurance was that there should be a competition among care providers. The idea was that competition makes care better, so the quality will rise if different providers compete. This is why we have private and non-for-profit providers in Germany, and the private providers have gained a larger share of the market. I'll give you a few numbers in a minute. And as was already mentioned in the presentation before me, domiciliary care, so care at home, is the main priority in the German care system. And one reason for that, or the most important reason that is always mentioned when discussing this, is that people want to stay at home, of course, because they might have lived in a certain apartment for many years. But another reason is that for the system, it's usually also cheaper to support care at home than to support people who move into a care home, into a facility. And one significant thing concerning the organization or the of care in Germany is that it is now divided into care modules. I will show you a little bit more details about this. For me, this is one of the most interesting aspects because it clearly defines what counts as care, what the price is, and what is not care. To get some money from the insurance, you have to have the label that you are in need of care, that you are dependent on care. And the definition in the German social law for that is that a person needs assistance with daily life activities due to physical, mental, or psychological impairments which last at least 6 months. So this could either be a long-term illness, but it's very often due to old age. So people just can't do everything themselves anymore, and they will never get better, or usually they won't get better, so it's going to last more than 6 months. And within this definition, there are 5 levels of care need, and depending on which level you have, you receive more or less money. This is an overview of the current situation of people receiving money from this long-term care insurance in Germany. The numbers are for 2015. So you can see the blue part is the largest part. This means these are people who just receive financial reimbursement from the insurance company. So they can decide themselves what they do with the money. They can give it to a relative, a family member, or a friend, but they just receive some money. Then the second largest part, 26%, are people who receive care in a nursing home. And the small green part means that these people exclusively are taken care of by professional providers. So they don't have any relatives, or they don't use money that they give to relatives, but all the money they receive from the insurance goes to a professional carer. And then the purple part, 16%, this is a combination. So these are people who receive some money that they can give to family members and some other money that they give to a professional provider. And all in all, in 2015, there were 2.6 million people receiving money from the care insurance in Germany. This doesn't mean that there aren't more people who need care, but this is just the number of people who get money from this insurance company, so who fit the definition of needing care. My research focuses exclusively on the professional home care sector, and I want to give you a few numbers about this. So after this insurance was introduced in the 90s, there was a boom. A lot of providers were founded. So just to compare, in 1992, before this insurance, there were 4,000 providers of professional care in all of Germany, West and East. And then 97, 2 years after the insurance was introduced, there were already 12,000. Since then, the numbers haven't changed so much, even though the number of people who need care have gone up, but mostly the care providers just grew. So maybe in the beginning they took care of 20 people, and now they have 40 patients. So 2013, there were 12,700 providers of domiciliary care in Germany, of which 64 were private. This is what I already mentioned. Before, there were a lot less private providers, but now they are gaining numbers. People working in the sector are number at around 320,000, and 87% of those are female. This is, of course, a fairly large number, and I was surprised to find that this number has actually even gone up. So, like a few years ago, there were 85% female workers in the home care sector, and for whatever reason, the number of men working in this field have decreased. And interestingly, and I think this is very similar in other countries, the male workers in this field very often work in management, in the they work with the budget aspects of care, and the provision of the actual care work is done to an even larger extent by women. Now, I mentioned care modules before. So here I show you 4 examples of what a care module is. And I have to say that this is different in every state in Germany. So, you know, we have 16 Bundesländer. And so, for example, Berlin defines their own list of this is what we define as care in Berlin, and this is what we pay for it. So this list basically is, and it's much longer. So I only show you 4 examples here. I think there are 25 modules for Berlin. So this list is actually what every care agency has to use. They are not allowed to give any other or perform any other tasks than what is defined in the list. So for example, personal hygiene, you can book partial or comprehensive hygiene, you receive these help with these tasks, and then you can see that the price is double for the comprehensive personal hygiene because it includes taking a shower, versus the partial personal hygiene is just like washing at the sink, for example. And then I thought it's interesting to just compare that a meal preparation, so this doesn't mean cooking, but preparing a cold meal or heating food that was delivered by someone else, costs $4.47. And actually helping someone with eating, this might either be just supervision or like physical help, for example, costs $12.81. And maybe I can just like give you a small insight in my own research. I observed how this kind of care was provided, and it's very interesting to see how this works in practice, because as you might imagine, a lot of times there are things where you can't really say, okay, is this part of this module? Or, you know, there was an old lady who had a big bottle of water and she was too weak to lift it. So the carer said, okay, no problem, I'm gonna take the big bottle and put the water in small bottles. And then the lady was able to like put the water in the glass herself. And, you know, old people are supposed to drink a lot. So this is an important aspect of care. But there's not really a module where this task fits into, but it takes time. So in practice, the carers always have to negotiate with themselves and with the client, do I do it? Or do I have to say, sorry, you have to ask someone else because I don't have time? I don't want to go into too much detail with the theory I'm working with, but I want to introduce my main framework, and that's basically that I'm trying to compare the discourse about marketization with what actually happens in practice. So the discourse I observed tells 2 different stories, but they share the same idea. So one story is positive. It says before there was care for people, but you didn't have to pay for it, and it was kind of chaotic, intransparent, because you didn't really know who did get care, what people gave in return. So now it's a very transparent system. You have these lists with the modules, you choose a provider, you know the price, and then you sit down, you make a contract, and it's a very fair and transparent system. So this is the positive discourse about marketization of care. And then, of course, there's a negative story that says, well, before it was all about the human connection. People had time to really take care of people. They didn't need to bother with lists and stuff like that. And now, on the contrary, it's all about money. So you don't have time to, sit down and listen to someone. You only count minutes and money. But what both stories share is this idea that the economy has now entered care. And whenever I hear a story like that, I'm interested in, okay, what's going on in practice? What do people do? So this is why I focus on practice theory. And again, I don't want to go too deep into this, but I'm interested in the material aspects of care. So, for example, a contract or a list of modules. What does this document actually do? But then also, how is the meaning of care changing, and what competencies do the carers need in this new system, and what competencies do the clients need? So this is what I'm trying to work with. I find very interesting work by researchers like Anne-Marie Mohl, who have written about care and practice as tinkering, improvising. So care is never like a straightforward, standardized thing. It's always something where you have to find local solutions. And then one author that whose work I admire and draw on heavily is Viviana Selitzer, who has written about this opposition between economic and intimate life, and her argument, and I share this, is that it's actually always a connection. It's never clear-cut differentiation in practice. I already mentioned that I did ethnographic research. So on the one hand, I followed nurses. I observed how they took care of the clients. But on the other hand, I also spent some time in the office of a care provider, because I was interested in how this work with all these documents was done behind the scenes. And it's very interesting to compare what's done with these lists when people only sit there with a computer and a pen, versus when they are in the care situation. All right, now I want to focus on one example. So the situation is that I am in the office of this care agency, and usually around lunchtime all the nurses come there when their shift ends or before their shift starts, and they sit down. Usually there's also the manager and the social worker present, and on that day there was this discussion. They talk about a client who has recently passed away. She died a few days ago, 2 weeks ago, I think. So the social worker, she was on holiday, so she asked, did anybody attend the funeral? And the manager says, yes, I went there 2 weeks ago. Her husband, so the husband of this client who died, was very pleased. On his way to the grave, he literally needed someone to lean on. The social worker then says, he sure knows that he can drop in here at any time, right? And as soon as he gets his pension approval certificate, he should get in touch. And then the manager says, she thinks back on the time before the patient died, or the day the patient died. It really was good that on his wife's last day we were with him. He had such an enormous fear of loss. Back then he said now he doesn't have anyone to talk to anymore. Now, the manager and the social worker, they discuss a fairly typical case. The female elderly client died, and these carers, they had taken care of her for several years. So over the years, they also got to know her husband fairly well, who was not a client, but he lived with her and he took care of his wife. So most often when care providers take care of people during the last years of their lives, then their support is as valuable to the client as it is to the relatives, because their professional carers' help gives them a chance to talk about their concerns. They get some advice how to deal with the care situation, and this is actually exactly what the care providers are paid for. So they take care of sick or fragile people through practical and emotional support, and this is how they enable them to stay at home with their relatives as long as possible. So they also support the relatives. And by doing that, they develop relationships with the client and with the relatives. So when a client dies, attending the funeral might be a way to also help the carers to come to terms with the death of this person. They had known them for many years, they took care of them, and maybe they want to ritually end the relationship they had. But they might also want to end the relationship they had with the relatives, because, of course, as I said, they also developed a close connection with them. The manager, in the example I gave, she gives further reasons why she thinks it was necessary to attend the funeral. She refers to the husband's emotional and physical condition. So she said he had an enormous fear, and she explains that during the funeral he really needed someone to lean on. So there was a physical need for the carer to be there. She gave social support, but also physical support. So she didn't do this out of sentiment, you could say, but it was like a care need that she took care of. However, there's another side to the story, because from an economical point of view, it doesn't make sense at all to attend the funeral, because it's not a care module. This is like a joke from me. There is no prize on attending a funeral. The provider's duties, they end with the death of the person, of the client. And usually most care providers struggle to make a living. So to use some time to go to a funeral, on the first glance, you don't really understand why do they do this. And then again, when they discuss this, they don't even consider their relationship to the client, but they talk about their relationship to the husband, who wasn't even a client of the care provider. So they supported him physically and socially, as I said. And then it goes even further. They say, well, you told him that he can come here and talk to us, right? And this is also very unusual. Normally in the office, there are no clients. They don't come to the office. And there's a lot of time pressure. So carers don't really have time at the office to sit down with a client and talk to them. So it's a paradox. Why are they talking about this like that? So you could interpret this as, okay, the old values of care are present here still. They had a relationship with this person, they care for him, they are completely altruistic, they offer help that they don't get paid for. And it's weird because, well, they need to be paid for their care, they need to set some boundaries. But it gets clearer when we listen to the end of the conversation, because the social worker made this remark that when the husband, when he received his approval certificate for his pensions, then he can come here. So it's clear that they expect him to be a future client. They got to know him, they know that his health is declining, and they know that he will need care in the future. And they kind of sustain this relationship. And right now he doesn't know how much money he will have every month, but as soon as he knows, he can come to them, and then they will set up a contract, and then they will provide care for him. But I think it wouldn't be fair to say that it was a purely manipulative, instrumental thing that the manager did. So that she was only thinking about the future, and he's going to be a client, we will get money from him, because he did need help during the funeral, and she gave help to him. She supported him. So what I think is very visible here is that it's a compromise. There are two purposes served. On the one hand, the care needs of this man were fulfilled during the funeral, but on the other hand, there's a long-term perspective with economical considerations in mind. So these are my conclusions, basically. This example very well, I think, shows that the boundaries of care are not as clear-cut as this current system makes it seem. And especially the care modules make it seem very clear-cut. And I think it invites us to think about two questions. The first one is, what does care actually include? So the existing system conceptualizes care as taking care of one person and their body. So this is what the modules mirror. They show what care one person needs. They are standardized and they are related to this person's daily life activities. It's said that this is very transparent and it helps the insurance company to keep track of what support was given. And then, of course, because the system is so easy, it reduces cost because, or this is the idea, because it's so easy to keep track of what's done and what isn't. But my example, I think, showed that care in practice is not always care for one person's body. It's about a network of relationships. It doesn't even end with the death of a person. And it doesn't start with the first visit of the professional carer in the home of the client. Like in this example, there might be an already existing relationship that needs to be sustained and that's based on trust and understanding that's built over a long time and that doesn't suddenly end. And this kind of relational work is very often, I think, disregarded when systems for care are set up. And since this relational work is not mentioned in any kind of list like that, it's very difficult to say, is it paid for, is it not paid for, is it even real work, or is this just something that people naturally do, that women just do, for example? This is why there is a lot of tension in the system, I think, that on the one hand you have these definitions and on the other hand you have care. But I also think there's a second question that we can discuss in relation to this example, and this is what kind of care is legitimate. So let's assume for a moment that it was not the manager's consideration for the relationship to attend the funeral. Let's assume that her only reason to do this was to make sure this man becomes a client. Would this make this care less valuable? This might be a little bit provocative question, because this is usually, we tend to think, oh no, this is not a good thing. But as I showed, without knowing her intentions, the care she provided was helpful for this man. So it's difficult to say if how much altruistic intention a carer has to have, and if an economical system reduces the core values of care, if it actually ensures that someone gets help. Well, I think in the end it's an ethical discussion, and it's certainly a discussion that maybe it doesn't even end at one point. Maybe this is something that changes over time, because our ideas of how people should be taken care of also change. And yeah, this is why I think it's an interesting thing to further study this, and I'm also interested in your thoughts and your questions. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.